it is Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about outlining. So if there is one thing that I have learned about myself in the past year or so of writing, it's that I am 100% a plotter. I need to outline, I need to plot my stories, but the problem with me is that I'm like a flawed plotter. I always underestimate how much of a plotter I am. I'll make a little outline and then decide yeah, that's enough. I know where the story's going, try to write it, and then it just always ends in catastrophe. Historically, that has been the case many times, and I'm sure there will come a day where I will forget everything I'm going to say in this video and revert back to that really bad habit. But that is not this day. Writing and focusing on my fantasy project for the past few months has been incredible and great practice for outlining. Over the winter, I focused pretty much exclusively on part 3 of this story, and I was actually able to finish it in time, sort of, to complete my winter writing goal, which you can find right here. Part 3 was a challenge because even though it followed the same rough structure as it has in past drafts, I was shaking it up a lot, adding a lot of new details and just a lot of even new scenes and plot lines. So it meant that I did have to do some outlining, but because I was still following that same sort of rough plot structure, I knew where everything was going. I kind of outlined as I went, which ended up working out fine for part 3, but I knew as soon as I finished part 3 and hit part 4 that I needed to slow things down, stop the bus, take some serious time to plot what was coming next. Why? Because part 4 was almost like a blank slate in my mind. I knew that I wasn't happy with the way part 4 has played in past drafts, but I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to change. So definitely a situation where you need to just stop everything and seriously think about what's coming and make a plan. Because at that point, all I really had to go with was the fact that I wasn't happy with the way it already was. And why? What was the problem with the previous drafts? So when I first tackled this story, I was trying to do it in one fell swoop, write the entire story in one unit. And that was before I realized that that was insane and split it into a trilogy. So I was just writing and writing and writing, and then kind of realized, wow, this is way long. I need to shut her down. So I just sort of threw in a battle scene and cut it off, thinking that was all you needed to do to wrap up a book and leave it on a cliffhanger. To be honest, I thought that was fine for a long time, for multiple drafts. I've revisited the story multiple times since then and never really thought critically about how that last part works till now. And when I realized that I was going to have to do some hardcore outlining for part 4, I wasn't freaked out about it or even upset. I actually have realized that I enjoy outlining, at least the way I do it. I'm not super strict with my outline. Most of the time I end up deviating from it, but there's still something just so satisfying about figuring out your sequence of events and then writing it down and then rewriting it and then rewriting it. And then I've been working on that outline for the past week or 2 weeks or so. And to be honest, I think I've decided that I'm going to wait until exams are done to actually start the writing, because I know that if I start the writing, then I'm just going to want to do that instead of studying. I'm going to have no self-control. So for the sake of my sanity and being responsible, I'm going to push off the actual writing until I have time for it. It's actually good though, because I feel the longer you can let an outline kind of percolate in there, the better it is for your story, because you're ruminating on it, you're figuring out the things that work and the things that don't, and you'll just get more familiar with the story for the time when you actually start writing it. The objective of my process of outlining isn't to make a super strict plan that I absolutely cannot deviate from under any circumstances ever. That's not really my style. Instead, it's more about just repetition, getting so familiar with the story and the rough sequence of events that by the time I sit down to write, I know it like the back of my hand. So if I do decide as I'm writing that I want to kind of get creative and go off script and do something that wasn't in my plan, I can trust that I know the story well enough to make the right call there, because I've spent so much time getting familiar with what needs to happen and why. But back to part 4. This is my chance to do it right, and I'm really thankful that God showed me what needed work in this part so that I didn't just plow ahead and make the exact same mistakes and think nothing of it, cutting off the story with no proper climax or resolution whatsoever. I want to really focus on giving shape to this climax, really ramping up intensity and pacing across the entire story, giving the reader just a little taste of resolution, and then pulling the rug out from under them just when they thought things were getting better. But how do you do that? Interestingly, a recent inspiration for proper story shape and how to make the structure of a story move up and down the way I want it to has been the most recent Spider-Man movie. I will not spoil anything, don't worry, but just watching that movie recently, in the past week or so, I've really been able to focus on the shape of the story. When do things get worse before they get better? When do things get better before they get worse? What are the ups and downs that need to happen? And how do you end it in a way that ties up all the loose ends in this story, but still leaves you hungry and wondering about the next one. One thing that I don't think I really thought about or included in past drafts of this story is that like dip in the climax when things get really, really dark. Because typically a climax isn't just intensity ramping up until it's over. There are ups and downs even within that climax where you don't know what's going to happen next. Like think of a battle scene. It's not just like the battle starts and then you fight for a bit and then you win. There's usually a point in the battle where things get really bleak. You're not sure who's going to win and something has to change in order for the battle to be won. To try and imagine what that like bleak moment looks like, a good example is Helm's Deep in The Two Towers, the second Lord of the Rings movie, where King Theoden is like getting his armor put on and just thinking, this is it, we're all going to die. I wanted to account for that dark moment in my outline, so I went back to 5th grade and I made one of those zigzaggy plot mountain things that I haven't used since way back when. I know it's not that pretty, but I made it while I was on lunch break at work, so I didn't have a lot of time or resources. The point is that I actually drew in that little dip in the climax to remind me to include that moment where things get really dark, especially dark, for everyone, all my different POVs. Which is another thing I included in my outline and really wanted to be like deliberate about is parallel storylines. I had lots of POVs going on in past drafts of this story too. I feel like even though I sort of intuitively made them all ramp up and dip and resolve at roughly the same times, I wasn't super intentional about it. It kind of just happened. And I think it could be more effective if I did put in that legwork to outline how that will specifically look in each specific storyline. Because ultimately in my climax, I want to be bouncing a lot between POVs. Things are ramping up, the pacing will get faster, I'm gonna make the scenes shorter so that it feels like you're constantly bouncing around. It's really chaotic, a little bit stressful, as it should be. It's a climax. And I think it's important for each of the parallel storylines to be moving roughly in the same direction. Like you don't want things to get really bleak over here and then flip to this other POV and it's just like a magical moment where everything's going well and nothing bad happens. That would feel like incongruent, and I feel like it would take away from the ramping up intensity that you're trying to build in your climax. I do want to be careful about how I do that though, because as much as I want my different storylines to sort of align and create that building up climax shape, I don't want them to feel like they're just like joined at the hip and moving in parallel with each other so that they're completely predictable. Like carbon copies or something. I don't want you to read one scene and then flip to the next one and know, oh, well, this is about to happen because this just happened in the other one. Because realistically, there's no reason for all of those storylines to be moving up and down in the exact same way, to be going through dark moments at the exact same times. I need them to do that for the story, to build the story shape that I want, but in order to make it kind of believable, I have to make it make sense so that it feels natural and so that the reader doesn't pick up on it and just see a plot device instead of seeing all the stories. What I'm trying to do through my outline is to figure out how to make all those POVs align in a way that creates an epic climax in all storylines, but doesn't feel too contrived, like feels natural. I mapped this out in my outline using my zigzaggy plot mountain to figure out what is going on in each POV at each specific part of the climax. So pre-climax, rising action. Character A is traveling, character B is a captive, character C is a fugitive. Then the climax gets started. Character A is fighting something, character B is being tortured, character C just got arrested. Then comes the dip in the climax, that really, really bleak moment where you don't know if these characters are going to make it out. Character A is fighting a battle he might not be able to win. Character B just had a really important secret tortured out of her, and character C is about to be executed like any second now. Mapping it out this way actually helped me so much to figure out what each individual plotline needs to look like in order to create that climax shape. I'm not just guessing, I'm not just throwing a bunch of scenes together like I did in the old one, hoping that it would create a sort of climax. I wanted to be intentional about it, and I wanted to use each individual plotline, each parallel point of view, to contribute to that overall climax feel. It'll be a challenge, but like I'm excited about it, and outlining honestly just saved the day. So if you forget everything else from this video, remember that. Outlining is worth it. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like and subscribe and comment below with books that you think did climaxes really well with multiple POVs. I think The Way of Kings is a really good example, or Winter, the last book in the Lunar Chronicles, that had lots of POVs going on at the same time, and I thought it was super effective. But I would also love to hear your faves. And as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.